Hello and welcome to World News Tonight here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. There have been some important political statements, but no breakthroughs on the war in Ukraine. In today's programme, we analyse what has been achieved so far at the Munich Security Conference. But before that, let's take a quick look at the latest headlines. Transatlantic tensions between Berlin and Washington, a sharp rebuke from German political leaders of Vice President J.D. Vance. The U.S. Defense Secretary announced during a visit to Poland that he wants even more American troops stationed in this part of Europe. A noisy demonstration in Serbia. Thousands of people gathered to show their dissatisfaction with the government of President Aleksandar Vučić. We will never accept deals reached behind our backs. That's the blunt message from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy as he warns leaders that Europe needs to decide its own future. Zelenskyy was speaking at the Munich Security Conference just a day after meeting with US Vice President J.D. Vance. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Darman, is there and joins us now. Hello, Aaron. What was the key takeaway today?
Good evening, Ashim. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is not taking his mission to Munich lightly. After meeting with US Vice President J.D. Vance last night, he today addressed the Munich Security Conference, warning that if it's not Brussels, it's Moscow. He also called for a European army. Here's more of what he told us.
Everything needed to protect lives in modern war should be produced in Europe fully. Europe has everything it takes. Europe just needs to come together and start acting in a way that no one can say no to Europe. But America needs to see where Europe is heading. And this direction of European policy shouldn't just be promising, it should make America want to stand with a strong Europe. This is absolutely possible, I'm sure of it. And we must shape that course. Europe must decide its own future.
Politics moves slowly until it doesn't. And ever since Donald Trump's shock phone call to Vladimir Putin this week, European governments have been scrambling to assert the continent's role in any peace deal. Moments ago, Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed Europe's role. This is what he had to say.
We will be part of EU, and that's why for us the voice of Europe has to sound at the same level. Yes, United States militarily the main strategic partner, but the EU is also very, very big partner, and EU leader, they helped a lot. That's why we need, in any case, in any diplomacy, in the future, yes, the future is not only the result, the future is the way, and on this way we have to go shoulder to shoulder with Europeans. That's why we need any table of negotiations, we need representation of Europe.
And for the first time, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has weighed in on that Trump call and what it means for the path going forward. Listen to this.
I'm not too worried about Europe not having been consulted before the call. I think the call was a mistake. I argued against an early summit because it vindicates President Putin and lowers morale in Ukraine. But when President Trump says that as part of a deal there will have to be European troops, well, we'll have to be asked to supply them. So sooner or later we'll have to be involved. But in a broader sense, this is a crisis and a result of Europe having consumed peace dividend for too long.
Now, we sat down with Minister Sikorski on the rooftop of the Hotel Bayerischer Hof this afternoon, and we'll be bringing you that exclusive interview later in the show. Ashim.
Thanks very much for that, Aaron. As Donald Trump's diplomatic push to end Russia's war on Ukraine accelerates, many Ukrainians are expressing concern that they may be shut out of negotiations. Our correspondent Oz Kataji has more from Kyiv.
With the flurry of diplomatic activity happening at the Munich Security Conference involving the war in Ukraine, many Ukrainians are growing increasingly concerned by the signals they are hearing from the Trump administration about how they see ending the war here in Ukraine and on what terms. Now, we spoke to many Ukrainians earlier in the day. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
In 2022, they gave us hope that they could help us to fight off Russia. But now, when Donald Trump came to power, it just very frustrating, especially those recent news that Ukraine will not participate in the negotiations.
Yes, I know this plan, but it's not correct for Ukrainian plan. It's not correct, but Russia is aggressor. No, it's aggressor. It's a bandit, world bandit, Putin.
From one side, Trump and the most close people to him are very positive. From other, sometimes even pro-Russian.
I think if NATO would get together and move in and defend Ukraine for freedom, we could resolve this a lot quicker and stop dictators like Putin thinking they can impose their will unjustly on other countries.
As Donald Trump's push to end the war in Ukraine through diplomacy intensifies, as you can hear from many Ukrainians here that we spoke to in Kyiv, they are growing concerned and alarmed by some of what they're hearing. However, with so few details available about how the US actually intends to end the war here in Ukraine, the confusion and concern look set to continue for some time to come. It's Oz Kataji reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
European Council President Antonio Costa reiterated his support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on the second day of the Munich Security Conference. It comes as President Zelenskyy continues to face increasingly challenging ceasefire negotiations brokered by US President Donald Trump, with many in Brussels uncertain if Europe will have a seat at the negotiating table. EU correspondent Angela Skuyens has this report from the Belgian capital.
European Council President Antonio Costa reiterated Europe's continued support for Ukraine as that country is in the early days of ceasefire negotiations with Russia. The Belgian official made the comments at the Munich Security Conference today in Germany. He advocated for Europe to have a seat at the negotiation table as well as security guarantees. Here is what that official had to say.
Only Ukraine can define when there are conditions for a negotiation. Assuming concessions before any negotiation is a huge mistake. Therefore, we will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in the negotiations, providing security guarantees in reconstruction and as a future member of the European Union.
The comments come as US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg told reporters today that Europe will not be present as part of these talks. He said that he didn't want those conversations to be crowded out, but Europe's needs would be represented as part of those negotiations. We've also heard from the European Commission that foreign ministers will meet tomorrow for an informal conference. This has been brokered by the EU's top foreign policy boss, Kaja Kallas. It's before foreign leaders will meet in Paris on Monday to hammer out an official continental response to these ceasefire talks. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier had harsh words on Friday for the United States, saying that the Trump administration is ignoring established international rules. The comment came during a speech at the Munich Security Conference. Sasha Farbach reports.
The snow and frigid temperatures in Munich aren't just affecting the conference attendees. They're also a fitting backdrop of the chilly state of the transatlantic relationship between the US and Europe. After weeks of mixed signals from Washington, Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier had a message from Berlin.
What is certain is that the new American administration has a different worldview to ours, one that has no regard for established rules, established partnerships and trust.
As Europeans continue to face and deter an aggressive Russia in Ukraine, in a war now entering its third year, Vice President Vance sees other threats as more pressing.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
As Germany's elections are just a week away, Musk and others close to Trump have recently endorsed the far-right AfD. Vice President Vance snubbing a meeting with the current chancellor in favor of the AfD's party chairman, Alice Weidel, a taboo in Germany, leading to bipartisan condemnation from Germany's political leaders.
We respect the presidential elections and the congressional elections in the US, and we expect the US to do the same here.
That is why we will not accept outsiders intervening in our democracy and our elections and the democratic formation of opinion in favor of this party. You can't do that, especially not between friends and allies.
Any new chancellor of Germany will face a range of challenges, continuing the modernization of a military that is still lagging behind. Some experts doubt that Berlin has what it takes to lead Europe against a mercurial Donald Trump.
I don't think at the moment Germany has the maturity or the capacity to do it alone and sort of be the first voice, as Kissinger said, about who do we call in the EU.
Germany has tried to adapt to new challenges. Days after Russia invaded Ukraine, Chancellor Scholz announced his sea change, 100 billion euros for the German armed forces. The country's president, however, says more must be done.
When dangers grow, our ability to defend against these dangers must also grow with them. We will have to spend significantly more than we agreed back then. There is no way around this. And any new German government will have to create the necessary financial scope for this.
As elections loom, Germany faces a crossroads. Will it rise to the challenge or freeze under pressure?
As Western leaders gather in Munich to discuss the path forward, Ukraine continues to defend itself against Russian aggression, facing a daily barrage of missile and drone attacks on cities across the country. Let's go live now to Don Arleth, who's in Lviv, Ukraine, for the latest. Don, are there any signs that Vladimir Putin is winding down military operations and looking toward negotiating for peace?
Well, it certainly appears that Vladimir Putin indeed is not looking for peace. In the last 24 hours here in Ukraine, Russia launched 70 drone strikes across the country, with the results ending up in the killing of 3 civilians. Another 12 were injured. Now, about half, or 33 of these drones, were shot down by Ukrainian armed forces and air defense forces in several regions from Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, the Donetsk Oblast, as well as Poltava and Dnipropetrovsk. An additional 37 drones were disappeared from radar, the armed forces saying that those were likely decoys trying to get as many of those drones through to their targets as possible. However, Ukraine was successful enough to be able to at least take out 33 of those, and as I said, more civilians dying here in Ukraine today. Now back to you.
Thank you very much for that, Don, and stay safe. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has visited American soldiers stationed in Poland alongside Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. There are currently close to 10,000 U.S. soldiers in the country, serving as one of Poland's most important security guarantees. Kazimierz Wysiak has this report.
It is Pete Hegseth's first official visit abroad in his new role as the U.S. Defense Secretary, and the fact it's to Poland is not without significance, as he said himself. He even decided to stay in the country for a bit longer on Saturday in order to visit American soldiers stationed here, accompanied by Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. A day prior, Hegseth spared no praise for Poland.
Poland, a strategic frontline partner on NATO's eastern flank. Poland, a staunch U.S. ally. Poland, as I said, model ally. Not only in words are cheap, but in deed and in actions.
By deeds and actions, the US Defense Secretary meant first and foremost Poland's robust military spending. At close to 4.7% GDP, it is the highest percentage-wise in all of NATO.
Our strategy is to be the transatlantic link between the United States and Europe, because Poland is best prepared for this and also best understands what the United States is doing today.
We are main hub when it comes to logistics and support for Ukraine, and we are a strong and big country in this region with a strong army, which could be core of defense of our region.
Poland has been encouraging other European countries to spend more on defense, especially in the face of the recent America First policy of US President Donald Trump. That call has also been to the liking of the US Defense Secretary.
Thousands of students gathered in central Serbia for a massive anti-government demonstration. The protests following the deadly collapse of a railway station roof late last year have been going on almost continuously for the past several weeks. Could these demonstrations lead to the resignation of President Vučić? Kazimierz Wyszak reports.
Serbian students have marched from all over the country for 4 days before reaching the town of Kragujevac on Saturday for a massive demonstration.
I think that as time goes by, this will only get stronger and stronger. And we will not stop until our demands are met and until we actually get justice.
These protests have been taking place on and off for the past several weeks, and even the resignation of the Serbian Prime Minister has failed to calm the tensions in the country. The unrest began after a roof of a railway station in Novi Sad collapsed in November last year, killing 15 people. But protesters argued the incident revealed a deeper problem of corruption in Serbia.
I'm here because we want a better world for all of us. We don't want anyone to lie to us anymore.
President Vučić now finds himself in hot water, but he's trying to put on a brave face.
This is great news for Serbia. Why? Because every conversation is healing. If you don't want to talk, yet you formed a team for discussions, what is your message then?
The protesters haven't officially demanded the president's resignation, but can the growing pressure lead to Vučić losing power? One expert says it's unlikely.
In my frank opinion, no. Because for the time being, these demonstrations are only having a sort of not a political stance or political type of demonstration, but more sort of a social protest.
The protesters demand the publishing of documents related to the rooftop collapse, justice for those responsible and more spending on higher education. President Vučić says these demands have been met, but the demonstrations continue. Kazimierz Wyszak, TVP World.
An opera with a post-apocalyptic twist? Well, that's exactly what the Polish National Opera in Warsaw delivered on February the 14th. They reimagined Giuseppe Verdi's Simon Boccanegra, shifting its dark tale of politics and paternal love from 14th century Genoa to a haunting dystopian future. Curious how they pulled it off? Well, Carolina Shapland has an exclusive behind-the-scenes look for you.
Step behind the scene, the National Opera in Warsaw's stunning production of Simon Boccanegra, Verdi's opera that originally is set in medieval Genoa in Italy. Polish film director Agnieszka Smoczyńska transposed this opera into a post-apocalyptic landscape. Here she tells TVP World why she made this artistic choice.
Originally set in the medieval times, in the 14th century, and we wanted to create a new world. What will happen after climate changes, and we decided to create new medieval times. That's why it's set in the future, after the sun burned the whole land, and there is no water, no energy, no electricity.
Although Simona Boccanegra is Verdi's lesser-known opera, the maestro Fabio Biondi told us why he feels that after this staging, it might become part of the new canon.
I hope that this performing will bring again in the focus this opera, because without Boccanegra, I think we can't understand really the genius of Verdi.
We now go back to Munich, where our very own Aaron Darman sat down with Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski to hear his insights into the security conference so far.
You're watching TVP World's special coverage of the 61st Munich Security Conference on the rooftop of the Hotel Bayerischer Hof, and joining me now is Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. Thank you for your time.
Hello.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says if not Brussels, then Moscow. Is he right?
To some extent, it's certainly a civilizational struggle. We represent the world of rules, of peace, of prosperity, and Putin has gone back to the world of Genghis Khan.
President Zelenskyy is also pushing for a European army. Would Poland be involved with that?
I think we should be careful with this term, because different people understand different things. If you understand by it the unification of national armies, it will not happen. But I have been an advocate for Europe, for the European Union, to develop its own defense capabilities. And we are actually in the process of forming a reinforced brigade. That's not enough to deter Putin, but it's enough to perhaps sort out some warlord in Libya. If the US wants us to step up in defense, it should have a national component, a NATO component, but I also believe a European EU component. EU subsidies for the defense industry to build up our capacity to produce, but also an EU force worthy of its name.
Could an EU component involve Polish troops on the ground in Ukraine, perhaps after a ceasefire deal has been struck?
This is not a consideration, because Poland's duty to NATO is to protect the eastern flank, i.e. its own territory.
President Zelenskyy has made some suggestion that Poland or the Baltics, that Russia is preparing to invade Poland or the Baltics, a NATO country. What do you make of that?
Putin's aims are extraordinarily ambitious, way beyond the capacity of his country, which he's ruining. Ukraine, through its heroic resistance, has given us time to prepare to effectively deter Putin. Putin can't win with Ukraine. I don't think he can win with NATO, but it doesn't mean he won't try.
Do you feel like NATO or the EU are taking the threats of Russia seriously enough when it comes to a potential NATO attack?
Well, the seriousness grows with the diminishing physical proximity to Russia. So yes, we as neighbors of Russia, we are sufficiently scared of his cruelty, of his hypocrisy, of his brutality. But further away from Russia, they also need to make their judgments that if Russia were to conquer Ukraine, the cost of deterring Putin would rise exponentially.
I want to draw your mind back to US Vice President J.D. Vance's address. He says he's not as worried about Russia and China as the risk of Europe losing its democratic values. Your thoughts on that?
Europe is a democracy. We have a different attitude than the United States to freedom of speech. In the US, it's almost absolute, whereas in Europe, we have libel laws. So there is just a difference here. He was right that migration is a concern for electorates everywhere. But another difference is that we have campaign finance rules. So, for example, in Romania, he cited the case. One of the candidates declared that he was spending zero on the campaign. Actually, someone was spending on his behalf huge amounts of money by our European standards. So these are just differences. But on the whole, it's part of a democratic conversation. Slight pity that President Vance did not communicate his strategic vision in the area of security. This is a security conference.
What did you make of that? The fact that he barely mentioned Ukraine, he didn't really talk about defence, but instead took a totally different tack. To some, they were shocked and surprised by that. Were you?
We were relieved because there was some press speculation that he might announce cuts in US military presence in Europe, and he didn't do that.
So you were relieved by...
Indeed.
You've also met with Ukrainian envoy Keith Kellogg this week. Is a peace deal close?
Well, I met him bilaterally yesterday. I'm meeting him again together with my European colleagues. So it's good that there is this conversation with the US Special Representative for Ukraine.
J.D. Vance did make one mention of Ukraine, quoting, "We can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine." Does Ukraine have reason to be worried about that word, what reasonable means?
Well, I'm sure the Russian and the Ukrainian definitions are radically different at the moment. But this is just talk about possible future negotiations. It's I think, feeling the lay of the land, of discovering of what's acceptable to whom.
What sense did you get from Keith Kellogg about what the US plans in Ukraine?
The conversation, again, has only just started.
So you're looking forward to having a more...
What I believe we need to do is to plan for the support of Ukraine for the medium term, for next year and the year after. We need to convince Putin that we are not seeking business as usual at any price, that we are prepared to stay the course, that we think this is a colonial war. These colonial wars usually take up to a decade. Anything shorter than that would be a bonus, but we can wait him out until his economy collapses.
And so you're looking forward to further conversations with Mr. Kellogg?
We need to synchronize. Every new administration discovers certain things afresh and has, its own ideas. That's perfectly legitimate, and we need to synchronize our actions.
How does Donald Trump picking up the phone direct to Vladimir Putin, how does that change the equation, change the negotiation, especially before talking to Volodymyr Zelenskyy on the phone?
We shall see. Donald Trump believes in personal diplomacy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We hope it works in a way that preserves Ukrainian independence this time.
Are you optimistic it will be?
We shall pray for it.
Russia used drones to attack Chernobyl this week. How dangerous is this, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe? Is this type of warfare playing with catastrophe?
Well, these Russian drones fly all over the place. We've had news that Belarusians are shooting down rogue Russian drones that are in imminent danger of breaching NATO airspace. It's really irresponsible of the Russians to be fighting a war against a country that has nuclear power plants, because you cannot predict when these out-of-control drones, where they will go. And if this one struck Chernobyl, which it looks like it, you never know what might happen. The last time, in 1986, when Chernobyl blew up, all of Europe was affected, from Finland to Poland, Western Europe, and you never know when the wind will blow. So I've argued before, and this strengthens my argument, that for the sake of our own interest, we should strengthen Ukraine's anti-aircraft and anti-missile capacities.
And on a domestic front, President Duda insists Fort Trump, a permanent US military base, will be built in Poland. Do you think that will happen?
Well, I'd like to see evidence of President Duda's friendship with President Trump on behalf of Ukraine and on behalf of US presence in Europe. I'd like to see the evidence of that. For the last 2 months, I haven't yet. So I'm again urging President Duda to use his friendship on behalf of Polish interests.
And lastly, J.D. Vance says there's a new sheriff in town. Is the new sheriff President Trump? Does he care about European security?
Well, we are allies, and that means that our predecessors have made a judgment that security interests are intertwined. You know, it is a bargain, actually. You know, if you, the US, help us with deterring Russia, we will help you with your rivalry with China. There are all these deals, and they are reciprocal. We assume that the US will protect us from Russia. We sent a brigade to Iraq and to Afghanistan. You know, there's a give and take.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, thank you again for your time.
Pleasure.
And that's all for this exclusive interview here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Goodbye for now.
And that's all from us. Thank you very much for joining us. Good night.